Is this thing on? There we go. Hello, everybody. Yes, it's your good friend Pozzible here. I don't know what it is about the holidays that makes me so lazy sometimes, but I'm hoping after Christmas to get my act back together again and start improving this site a lot more. In the meantime, though, I do want to keep podcasting and reviewing. This time we're going back just 2 years. We're going back to the Wii edition of Dungeons and Dragons. They came out with all three games. Dragon's Lair, Dragon's Lair 2, Time Warp, and of course Space Ace. Not in that order though. Even though they put in that order, they were released in a different order. I got the game not too long ago, and I started playing it. Of course, I started with Dragon's Lair, the game that started it all, back in 1983. So this is 30 years in the making here, when Don Bluth created a hero, Dirk the Daring, who basically went into the castle to save the Princess Daphne. A standard story but for its time, the animation and the visualization was extremely advanced than what we were used to. Back in those days, having grown up in the 80s and everything, I know that video games used to be a square. Everything was squares, maybe a circle if you were lucky, but you really couldn't get this kind of imagery back then, especially not for a video game. We were used to it for cartoons, but not for a video game. That being said, it wasn't a video game like we know it today, where we control, left, right. Whenever we do something, the character naturally does it for us. Here, it's more like Simon Says. The game tells us to hit a button. If we hit it, it goes forward. If we don't hit it, or we hit the wrong button, then we get the death sequence, okay? And you only had one chance. It was not very easy, because, it started off easy. You started off and you had some time. You had to think. You could actually say, okay, I need to do this. Over time, however, it started getting faster and faster. But it was always the same stuff, which has always made me wonder why it took me so long to finish it, because it was always the same pattern. The patterns very rarely changed. The only time it changed is if they reverse themselves. Like, that you could arrive in a room where Dirk, he has the swinging ropes. Well, at one point, Dirk walks in and he's on the left-hand side, he's got to swing to the right. Other times, Dirk is on the right-hand side, he's got to swing to the left. A very challenging game, especially for somebody of my age. I really wanted to beat it, and I finally did. So I'm very, very proud of myself that I finally beat this game. One interesting thing to note: Don Bluth, is a Disney animator. That's where he came from. So you'll see a lot of the images in Dragon's Lair look like Disney animation. Dirk was a hilarious character. He was a quirky guy. He had a serious attitude, but he was a dork, a big time dork. Princess Daphne, on the other hand, it's so funny. When they first started this, they didn't have a budget for models, so they dug into the Playboy magazines and they came up with Princess Daphne. So that's how we got to her. Very interesting heroine, standard heroine for that time period. As Don Bluth liked to say, her elevator doesn't go to the top floor. So, but then again, that's not why we loved her. She was considered back in 1983 the most beautiful video game character ever at that time. Next up, we have the next game that came out, which was Space Ace. This was the next game I beat, and I can say finally beat. Space Ace was the similar but different storyline than Dragon's Lair. Here, instead of being a knight, you are a space knight. You're in outer space. And this was more of those serials from a long time ago where basically the girl gets kidnapped, you have to go rescue her, but you also have to, quote, save your manhood. Now, it's not that kind of manhood. Basically, he keeps reverting back to a child. However, he does have the option. I always thought it was required to do this, but I learned later on it was an option to change from the boy into a man. And of course, if you did become a man, you didn't stay that way. You reverted back, okay? Your job was to save the world, even though for the most part, all we know is that you have to save the girl. It's only later on that you realize, hey, he's going to shoot Earth with something. It's called the Infanto Ray. Oh, the only thing Infanto Ray does is it turns everybody into a baby, So I can think of worse things. But hey, it was a fun game. Same format, though. Simon Says you have to push a button when they tell you to push a button. If you don't, you die. And that actually brings up a problem with these games, too. Sometimes you actually wanted to die. You wanted to see how they were going to kill you. Each death was different. You know, for the most part, some deaths you were falling into a pit. Other times you were being completely surrounded by monsters, little monsters. Other times a big monster would just eat you up. You know, the deaths were hilarious, and sometimes you would die just to see how you would die. All right, so that was all 1983, 1984. These things came out back to back. They are Laserdisc games. They came out during a time when the arcade craze was beginning to die off. People weren't as into arcades as they used to be, you know, throwing in the quarters. And that brings us to 1991 when we came out with, I mentioned about Kimberly, another beautiful heroine. However, she was not as, you know, ditzy as Daphne was. She was actually more of a firebrand, but still just as beautiful, just, you know, typical damsel in distress. We come down to Time Warp 2. Time Warp 2, again, everything's pretty much the same. He has to rescue Daphne, damsel in distress, against this evil wizard. Now, what's interesting, and this is the part they never really went over in much detail, we basically have Dirk going around in this time machine. Now, the time machine is the wizard's brother. Like, I don't know if it's his spirit that got in there or something, or somehow the wizard transformed him into this time machine. I don't know. But basically, he uses this time machine to go through time. And what does that mean? It means he goes to Alice in Wonderland. It means he goes back to the Garden of Eden, where he meets a very big Eve and has to fight one snake that wants to eat him, one snake that wants to use him. He meets up with Mozart, or Beethoven. Actually, I think it's Beethoven. And Beethoven is playing one of his symphonies, and that is one of the craziest times, because the hardest part about all of these games is that you have a cartoon in front of you and you want to watch the cartoon, but on the other hand you got to make sure you hit the right buttons at the right time. So eventually you just get tired of the animation. You can follow through with the buttons. Every time you're in a new place it's hard, because again, you're multitasking. You're watching the cartoon while trying to hit the buttons. Here, there was also another challenge. Now, this is where I got upset with Time Warp here. In Dragon's Lair 2, I went through the missions, but I saw these gold things flashing. Like there'd be an arrow, there'd be a bow, there'd be a deck of cards. These were treasures, and in my game, the Wii required me to grab the treasures. Now, some people used to tell me that it was optional, like you didn't have to grab it. But when I did it, you did have to do it, because I had to go back. When I was first playing, I was almost done. I was heading to the last level finally, and they said, no, you got to go back and get all the treasures before you can proceed. So I had to play all that. I had to figure out what the treasures were at first, and then I had to go back and say, like, okay, here's a treasure, get that, get that. I couldn't even find the treasure with the Beethoven room because the treasures are gold, and the treasure is the second time the cat, there's a cat here, who breathes fire on you. So the cat's trying to bring fire, which is yellow. It's a yellow butterfly, which is yellow, so it's very hard to see it. But if you play this game, that's where it is, you know. I finally beat the game, so that's why I'm doing this review and talking about the Wii's version of Dragon's Lair and Dragon's Lair 2 and Space Ace, because I finally, after 30 years of playing them, I finally got to beat them. You know, fun games. If you haven't had a chance, and I would be surprised if you didn't, they're everywhere. You know, they're on every port. They've been around since before the Wii, even on GameCube, even, you know, on all sorts of computer games. So I do definitely highly recommend that. With that being said, gang, it's been a pleasure. I'll be speaking to you next time. And until then, have a very Merry Christmas. It is the 23rd, so tomorrow's Christmas Eve and then Christmas Day. Take care of yourselves. Bye.